Cinque Terre is an Italian coastline set along the Ligurian Riviera and comprises 5 picturesque villages. With colourful buildings clinging to steep slopes, tiny harbours, winding alleys and steps. Levanto is considered to be its gateway. Located in one of the most popular resorts of the eponymous Riviera is the Sant'Andrea Parish Church on Old Town Hill. The interior of the early Gothic columned basilica contains all of the characteristics of its Genoese models. Simple columns and a circular arch, and a pulpit carved in marble. Also, the white altar with a small pipe organ in the background is a beguiling sight. The silence says it all. Many come here to explore the region, a peaceful area, and now a small town. The Piazza Cavour is at the centre, and the Loggia del Comune is reminiscent of the city's medieval history. The museum contains some interesting exhibits. The last remnants of the city wall and its defensive towers are mainly to be found in the southern part of the old town. The church tower can be seen from almost everywhere. Its chimes always on time. And here, also situated on the hill, was once the city wall, of which much of its defensive tower has been preserved. The small town had to protect itself from the land side, as the Saracens attempted to invade it from the mountain slopes. A little higher, beyond the Sant'Andrea Church, is the late Gothic San Giorgio Castle. The Genoese built both the castle and tower to defend city and port. The Genoese were experienced as a sea power, as well as defenders of their cities. Even today, the boats are well camouflaged in the small harbour. The tranquil rocky bays and long stretches of beach are ideal for swimming and bathing. A scenic gem framed by hills. Monterosso Al Mare is the first and largest of the 5 villages that comprise Cinque Terre on the route south. The modern district of Fegina has a long waterfront promenade, a well-kept sandy beach and a good range of accommodation. It extends across 2 bays and 2 districts, separated by a rock. capuchin made of stone finishes the shore on the northwestern side. There are many beautiful views of the sea. And the district separating Cristoforo Hill is accessed via a tunnel. This is the Old District, along with a view of the small harbour beach and railway, the lines of which separate the beach from the old town. On the hill, a Capuchin monk points to a church. In 1619, this monastery church was built and consecrated to St. Francis of Assisi. Here, the monks found a wonderful place for prayer and contemplation. Above the monastery are the ruins of a Genoese fortress, from which the surrounding area can be seen. The view back to the old town shows how the original Monterosso is embedded within this hollow. In the centre of the old town, narrow streets lead uphill between colourful buildings, with defensive walls and tower. Despite tourism, the rustic ambience has been well preserved, and the small shops tastefully blend in with the local scenery. The San Giovanni Battista Parish Church is attached behind a loggia. It was built by the Genoese and dedicated to John the Baptist, patron saint of Genoa. The interior was recently rebuilt according to Baroque design. Adjacent, a black and white striped facade catches the eye. The Church of Pirates and the Dead. It is said that pirates financed its construction in order to appease their conscience. In the main square, the Piazza Garibaldi, the local people meet throughout the day and evening. We go by rail to Vernazza, which is considered to be the most beautiful of the 5 villages, mainly because of its location within a splendid bay. Tourists walk from the station down the narrow main street to the tiny harbour. At the harbour, the small square is dominated by a large and tight array of restaurant tables. It's a wonderful sight, and the port ends with the Santa Margherita di Antiochia Church. Colourful buildings are densely packed together on the slopes, connected with steep and narrow steps. The Santa Margherita Church is connected with St. Margaret, whose finger bones were reportedly washed ashore here, lost and then found again. In her honour, the church and its octagonal bell tower were built. A pier protects the small natural harbour and provides anchorage for privately owned boats. From the pier, steep steps lead up to the top of a huge rock that is covered with buildings. On each side of the village, the banks are rocky and slope steeply into the sea. Vernazza was once only accessible from the water. Today, numerous ships travel along the coast, mainly taking tourists from place to place. The first view from the harbour is a magnificent sight. Steep and narrow steps disappear in between the buildings and crisscross the hillside. And from the outermost section, that contains a fortress tower, Vernazza and its vine-covered hills can be seen in all their glory. From these unique natural rocks, both the hinterland and coast are visible. The view sums up the paradisiacal quality of the landscape and captivating charm of Cinque Terre. Just a few steps away from the main tourist routes, peace returns. But most visitors just want the usual urban bustle. Corniglia has no direct access to the sea and extends along a massive rocky plateau about 100 meters above the sea. On the hilly outskirts is the San Pietro Church, built in 1334, with an elegant decorated facade and a rose window of Carrara marble. In contrast to the Gothic style of its exterior, the interior is mainly Baroque but adapted to Genoese design. The villagers are very religious, and so the church is well furnished and in tip-top order. The main altar, with a freestanding Jesus cross and painted dome, forms the centre of the three-nave church. The outer side walls indicate that it was built on the remains of an 11th century chapel. Towards a slope is a beautifully decorated old residential building of a wealthy family. The villagers earn their living from the cultivation of fruit and vegetables, as well as viniculture. In Corniglia, the quiet idyll predominates due to the relatively remote location of the village. In the narrow streets of the old town, the close-packed buildings leave little or no space for a view, only an occasional glimpse above the rooftops. Passing the stone gates of various defensive towers, we arrive at the village's small main square, which contains several parasol-covered tables. This is the Santa Caterina Chapel, a plain and simple building. Here too, the buildings are densely packed together, several floors high and painted in bright colours. From a distance, Corniglia seems to hover above the sea, as it looks down amicably at the other villages of Cinque Terre. Manarola can also be reached by train. A narrow street leads away from the station. There are fishing boats and various elevated buildings crop the view on each side. The rear view reveals a church tower and wine shops. Fishermen continue to earn their living here, and there are holiday apartments, as well as many souvenir shops that satisfy the demands of the many tourists who visit. The upper section of the village contains a fine terrace that offers splendid views, as well as the San Lorenzo Church. Opposite, there's a square, a freestanding bell tower that attracts visitors to the church. Its interior is adorned with a number of works that date back to the 15th century. And side altars with saints. Here, it can become pretty crowded with sightseers from each corner of the world. From above, the houses of Manarola look like stacked stones which reach to the sea. The village looks like a cubist painting, and it's not surprising that it has the nickname of the Painter's Village of Cinque Terre. There's also a fine view of both the village and seashore from the cemetery above the small harbour. There's a labyrinth of winding steps. One wrong turn and it's necessary to go back to the starting point and try again. Below, the sea, and above, vineyards, and in between, densely packed slopes and a feeling of communal living. What today is a picturesque village was once a community struggling to survive with a degree of independence. The steps, terraces and mule tracks are now popular tourist destinations, far removed from their original purpose. And yet, one still feels from afar the remoteness and loneliness of a wild and dangerous coast. We arrive at Riomaggiore. A mighty ledge separates the station from the village. Watchtowers still bear witness to its checkered past. According to legend, it was founded in the 8th century by Greeks who escaped to Italy from persecution by Byzantine Emperor Leo III. There is also written evidence that this location once belonged to the powerful house of Fegina, from which Pope Innocent IV came. Just beyond the small castello on the hill is the Cappella di San Rocco, which was founded in 1480 and contains only one room. From here, the Genoese founders had a total overview of the village, its environs, the harbour and the sea. The church of San Giovanni Battista was built in 1350. Three corridors separated by columns lead past the pulpit, which was created in 1530. And in front of the Baroque main altar is a wooden crucifix. Flanked by artistic side altars. Here, a brook separated the town in two halves, and a steeply rising main street was created. Starting at the church, a labyrinth of narrow streets and stone steps crisscross over two slopes. This network of archways and steps travels across the main street. It's lined with interesting shops, cafes and restaurants. From above, there's a colourful tangle of unusually elevated and densely packed buildings. Floor after floor piled up to make practical and efficient use of each spare metre of the valley. The Via Colombo leads from the mountainside to the small harbour bay. The colourful buildings were almost glued to the cliffs, right up to the seashore. The remaining space leaves no room for boats. Riomaggiore was once only accessible from the sea or by pathway through the local landscape. The short coastline is a paradise between heaven and earth, and a sought-after destination for tourists from all over the world. The villages advertise themselves as ruggedly picturesque, but there's no need. as Cinque Terre advertises itself, a true treasure of mankind.